in 4 webinar series. And if you had caught the first one, which was the basic intro into immersive audio about a month ago, great. If you had missed that, please check it out. I believe all members have access to that through the TPA portal, and you can get the basic introduction to what is immersive audio, what is spatial audio, and how could that possibly apply to the content you're creating. But today we're going to get into more advanced applications of how do you apply immersive audio or spatial audio or 3D audio. There's a lot of different ways it's referred to the type of content you're creating. Let me bring up. We'll be talking about enhancing narratives using immersive audio to create depth and atmosphere in storytelling, turning a simple story into an immersive experience. We're also going to be talking about transforming interviews in your non-scripted space or show. Does it make sense to add immersive audio elements to a interview-based show? And then audio effects, practical demonstrations of creating immersive and sound effects and everyday tools. We're even going to take a look at a podcast template that we use that one of our guests will use for immersive audio. But with that, I want to bring our 2 panelists on, because it's not so much about what I'm saying, what they're going to be teaching you. We have Ted Bonnet and Mert Ozcan. Ted, Mert.
Hey James, thanks
Hey
for inviting me.
Hi, James.
You're welcome. Hey, Mert. Hey. All right. So Mert has a degree in music production engineering from the Berklee College of Music. Mert went on to work for some of the most prestigious studios around the world, such as Abbey Road, British Grove, Capitol, Interscope Records. And after running the House of Rock studios with Beto Vargas, he started the Record House in Los Angeles. And Ted is a journalist and a Peabody Award-winning producer for national outlets like NBC, CNN, A&E, and NPR, and an award-winning audiobook producer. He has directed and produced critically acclaimed theatrical film documentaries and shorts and comedy programs, and co-hosts a Hollywood-based radio show and podcast. Ted's company, Radio Pictures, produces immersive audio and standard podcasts in all genres, including narrative history, fiction, investigative, nonfiction, true crime, and celebrity interviews. Mert, Ted, did I miss anything? I think Mert, you actually worked with our sponsor on this show, and Ted, I think I've worked with a lot of with Dolby too. So. Please jump in. But first, I want to start with some of the shows you guys worked with recently. Mert, why don't you lead us off? Tell us about some of the immersive audio shows you've worked on.
Sure. I got into immersive audio right at the beginning of the pandemic. I should say I set up my Atmos room 4 days before the lockdown orders came in, which was great. The main idea was to do like a little bit more post-production, since we do film and TV projects as well. And once the pandemic hits, like none of that was happening. I pivoted to doing like a lot of music mixes. So I've done Dolby Atmos mixes for artists like St. Vincent, Alt J, Major Lazer, and all these like, pop and rock bands. And then I think maybe 2 or 3 years into that, I got in touch with the people at Wondery. They were doing the Against the Odds series. And it's a very, immersive show, narrative show that they wanted to incorporate Dolby Atmos with, because, they have a lot of sound design and music, and really carry the show as if it's like a, TV, episodic content, but just without the image. So that's how I came to working with Wondery, and we've done a few seasons of that show, including the Apollo 13, the Donner series, Adrift the Atlantic. It tells stories of like people overcoming great odds. So we've done a few seasons with them, and it's been really great.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And Ted, tell us about your journey into immersive audio.
Well, I've been in audio forever, pretty much. It's my first love. And I mean, starting as a kid, I was a sound effects nerd. When people were buying rock and roll records, which I did, I was buying sound effect records. And so I love telling stories in the audio space. So I've done a little bit of everything from live comedy radio in New York with a lot of call-ins, which taught me how to paint pictures and find out that the audience is always a step ahead and super fast. And that really informed a lot. And then in my journalism career, I did long form and short form. I produced hourly newscasts for NBC and mutual radio networks. And that was taking the world and compressing it into 2.5 minutes, which was also a really interesting challenge. And then here in Hollywood, I produced hundreds of radio campaigns for major motion pictures, and that was compressing a feature into 30 and 60 seconds, which was also a really great learning experience for what we're doing now, because you're selling picture, but you're also not locked to the picture. So you have a lot more creativity. So for example, in Lord of the Rings, I had 165 sound elements in 60 seconds, including 11 pieces of music. So you can really, to me, 60 seconds is a super long time to tell a story. So all of that informed what I find to be the most interesting and exciting time ever, which is the long form, high end audio production quality that's available now to Atmos. Is really the tools out there now. You can really do anything in audio like never before. So I find it to be the most exciting time ever.
Wow, thanks for sharing. So Mert, when you stepped into really working in a immersive audio, 3D audio, spatial audio space, how do you approach that creatively? When working with Wondery, or any other client for that matter, when taking a look at creating that immersive audio space, how do you approach that creatively?
All of the projects that I've done have been, narrative shows. So in that regard, I kind of rely on my skills from the film and TV world. With this, obviously, there is no picture. So the one thing that's different is all of the character voices, the dialogues, they're not necessarily married to the center channel. We actually like spread them out a bit more to put the listener actually in the environment that the action is happening, because they can take a look around, or this character speaking from here and this other character speaking from there, and you're kind of like in the scene with them. I think that's unique to audio content. But besides that, the principles of, keeping the listener's focus and attention stays. You still want to direct people to like what they should be focused on, listen to, and what kind of like emotions you want to evoke in terms of like the music choices that you're doing and like the sound effects that's happening there. And if you're really, which one of those things you're really putting to the forefront is still you're just guiding the narrative and, keeping the listener going in that sense.
Thank you. Ted, when we first chatted, one of the things that really was exciting and intriguing for me was how you're applying immersive audio to your non-fiction podcast, and what you were doing in that. And to me, having created audio dramas in the scripted space, I totally get it. But in non-scripted, that was really, really informative. Walk us through your creative approach to non-scripted podcasts and how you look at immersive audio and implement it to be an effective storytelling tool.
Sure. Well, when I start a project, what I like to do is take the listener to the story. And one of the beautiful things about audio is that it's by nature an interactive medium, in that you can't comprehend it unless you stimulate your visual cortex. So if you look at your audio work as a canvas, and what I do is I paint. I mean, I can't draw worth a damn, but I can paint with sound. And so what I like to do is sort of tickle the visual cortex to really draw the listener in so that they feel like they're there and they experience it. It's, to me, more powerful than even a cinematic experience, because the listener is generating the imagery. So if you feed it that way, so it really can apply to fiction and nonfiction. And in the nonfiction space, we just finished something which is about the assassination of President Kennedy. And what we're able to do is go back in time and put people in the scene. And so, I mean, when I think about where we're at in the industry with audio, when I think immersive, I don't think just audio. I think we're entering the spatial age of computers and spatial entertainment. I mean, Sphere in Las Vegas is a very high profile example of that. And so what I'm doing and what we're doing is we're sort of creating sound for that world. If you go to take the Vision Pro demo at the Apple Store, that's the sound. We're kind of building the sound for that to come. to and say, here we are. We can build sound to create a realistic 3D environment. So we call it 3D sound because I think that's the easiest term to relate to, rather than immersive and all these other sounds and cinematic. So in the to your question, in the nonfiction space. So for example, in the Kennedy piece, what's little known is that there were 3 attempts to kill President Kennedy in November of 1963, all the same plan in 3 different cities with patsies set up. Pretty amazing story. And because it was a president, it's so well documented, even in 1963. So there are newsreel footage of Tampa, Florida, November 18th, 4 days before Kennedy was shot. We have that newsreel, and we have the newsreel announcer. And so what we can do now through AI, we can pull stems, we can pull sounds out of those mono, even the lousy mono sound, and pull the motorcycles and pull the crowd and pull the announcer and then remix it and basically build a sound that puts the listener in the action. And even when you have 2 people speaking to each other about the story, you can place them sort of left, right, and you can have almost the sound experience like on a screen in their mind in front of them. And one last thing is, if you want to say, well, we have a document to prove this actually happened. Say you're on a Vision Pro and you suddenly a little thumbnail shows up in your space environment. You can just sort of like finger gesture over to it, and the action will pause. And then you can sort of gesture that document to come over. You can read the document. Oh, yeah, yep, FBI did say that happened. Flick it away, it starts again. Now, I'm not saying we haven't done that yet, but that's the possibility of putting a person in the story. We can literally put the listener in the room where Ruby shot Oswald, or we could even put the listener in the back seat of the limousine. I mean, you can do it all. And when Oswald was running, we can run with him. So it's really very exciting. And again, more powerful than visual because we're stimulating the listener's imagination.
So what I'm hearing you subtly say is Apple should release podcasts on Vision Pro.
I think the Vision Pro, once it's downsized a little bit, is remarkable. I think it's absolutely a new era, and it's going to usher in an entirely new way of entertainment. And I know that
Oh man,
I've heard that Apple's looking for ideas. Boy, I'm sure there are a lot of people that have them. It's
well, here comes the
wonderful.
2025 webinar series for immersive immersive audio. That said, bring it back. So, thank you for sharing that. You've also been generous enough to create a great slideshow, which I like to bring up and kind of go through. And Mert, I want you to participate too. So hop in here and contribute the ideas and thoughts and experiences you see them um, as Ted has put together. So you call this, Ted, your 10 hacks for 3D audio, which I love because it breaks it down and makes it simple. This isn't rocket science. For a lot of the people
No.
listening in here, they may be looking at immersive audio, but kind of scared, or they may just have enough to get into it, but don't have quite nearly the experience you two have. So these 10 hacks, I think, really break it down into a basic, digestible, creative path to start implementing immersive audio to ensure your content is on the forefront of what the audiences are now expecting and experiencing from everybody out there creating podcasts. So I'll bring that up right now.
Yeah, Mert, I'm going to go through this very quickly. Obviously, there's a lot of information here that I won't be able to cover, but just please just scream when you want to say something. So because I'll be blowing through this pretty quickly.
You guys
Yeah,
see
so
everything? Okay.
yeah, I call it 10 brain hacks for 3D sound storytelling because it's pretty much, my thinking about immersive 3D sound is that I'm playing to the brain. The fact that Dolby Atmos and all these tools exist now, you can really paint to the brain, not so much the ears. I mean, obviously you mix to the ears, but you build to the brain. So that's where I'm going to go with this. So to try to overall conceptualize it, when I started a project for Mark Haynes Productions called Hindsight the Day Before, which is a dramatic podcast series that is available on all the platforms now. And when Mark and Kelly Lyons, who wrote and directed it, and a brilliant script, I asked what did they want, and they just said we don't know. We just want it to be the best sounding podcast ever to cut above the fray. So they meant it. And so I did some research, and I spoke. Basically, I was taking the cinematic world and the audio world and trying to merge it. So this Venn diagram is just a simplistic way of looking at what I'm doing here. Um, One of the way that sweet spot where the brain is between the headphones is there because you can take the best qualities of cinema, but at the same time, you're not married to a flat movie screen. You're not playing to a screen. I'm free of that. So I can really just go in all directions and just take the listener there. So that's what I talk about when I say about creating a middle world. So the source elements obviously have a great script, and thankfully they had a wonderful script. And we also had an incredible cast. And these are all working film and TV and stage actors, and have quite a history. And one of the things that we decided to do, so really important here, is that one of the things I never bought in most audio drama is I could hear that the performers were static, standing in front of a music stand and a script, and the sounds were swirling around them. And my brain didn't buy that. So what we decided to do was to create basically a set. And what I realized with the actors is that the reason they didn't sound fully realistic was because probably, and I learned this in the production of the show, a significant part of their attention was distracted by the fact that they were thinking as they're reading the lines, what am I doing while I'm reading this? So I said, well, I thought, why don't we just let them do it? So as you can see in these photographs, this is Santiago Cabrera on the left, uh, literally working on a trunk. So he was there feeling it. Actors interfacing with each other. The third one, you can see this is where a delivery man is sending a trunk over. So they're physically going through it. But as you can see, they're on carpet. And so they're absolutely silent. We're only capturing voice. And we're doing it through, we hired a production crew, a film production crew. So we could record up to 12 microphones on each scene. So that gave us full mix flexibility in the post to really create depth and dimension, which is really important. So again, blowing through this as fast as I can, in post-production and the dialogue editing is really critical. I mean, the pacing, if you're going to create, what we're trying to do is create a naturalistic environment. In other words, seduce the brain into thinking this is real. So you don't go outside of the story, you're in the story. So basically, you just think, well, what is it like when you have a conversation with somebody? It's really about pacing and dialogue. And people breathe and move and sit in their chair and move in their chair. So we do all of that. And then every take will sound natural by cutting literally down to the syllable. So it's very, very, we go right down to the micro level to create this naturalness. So it should ultimately be invisible. So as I said, when we build all this, we're thinking about the brain's perception. So we create situational awareness and we build immersive sets. What do I mean by that? In hindsight, we go from modern day to New York 1906, back and forth with flashbacks overlapping each other. So what you really have to do is create distinct sounds. So what we do is when we're doing a scene, I'm thinking, what room is this in? What kind of a room is it? 1906, probably tall ceilings, probably always a wall clock or there's always something happening. So we create a real world, and so that there's distinctive sounds in each set. And then the brain seeks patterns. So to create familiarity, quickly, an example, in one episode, we have 2 episodes where a scene in a shed, a clandestine meeting takes place in a shed. And the first time we go into the shed in episode 4, you hear him walk in and stumble on a shovel, but we don't say anything. Episode 5, they have another meeting. It's more frenetic. He stumbles into the shovel again, and we have the actor say, "Watch the shovel." Now the brain remembers that that shovel was hit in episode 4, so it creates space. It creates a familiarity. So, and lastly, the mind is just lightning fast, obviously. So fill all the pockets. If you're in a room and they have a pause between a sentence, you can insert the sound of, say, an elevator bell because you can tell them they're in the lobby. So again, I learned that from radio advertising. You can just go super fast. The brain is there, and actually, the brain will buy it more if it's a constant reality. Um, so the trick here was to mimic reality with depth and motion. So we did that through having the actors actually move and capturing that through multiple microphones. So thanks to Dolby Atmos, we were able to really pull that in. Big issue, footsteps or no footsteps. I get a lot of complaints from like film people. Why the footsteps? Well, the fact is, in real world, you hear footsteps. Sometimes you filter them out, but you often hear them. But they're really a device to create motion in a design. If someone's walking in from an angle, depending on their intent, they're either walking quickly, slowly, carefully, stealthily. And then you can also establish your scenes by having them step from a solid to, say, a wood floor. And so we know we moved into another scene. So there's all sorts of little tricks. And then audio establishing shots and close-ups. What that means is because the mind is so fast, you can establish a scene where people are having dinner in a like an establishing shot of a table with people having dinner, but you want to get into the conversation. Well, you can do that by simply changing and suddenly have a close-up sound of someone eating, and suddenly you've gone from establishing to a two-shot or close-up. So you think of that. And then sound effects are really important to push the movement as well. So when you have it all together, you layer the sounds. And so the question is Foley or sound effects. To tell you the truth, because of the internet and because of recording technology, every sound effect you ever needed is available to you now. I only, out of the thousands of sounds in the hindsight the day before, I think there's 3 Foleys out of all of the thousands because there's so much out there to use that you can trim and cut and perfectly sculpt your moments. It's much more efficient and accurate to me. And then drones are really big for foreshadowing and creating tension. And then all of this should be done in a rhythm because rhythm is, again, is pattern and rhythm pleases the mind. So if you hear in 1906, you hear a horn honk and then you hear a horse whinny because of it. It's just relationships like that. You can actually have some fun with that in humor, but it just sort of creates a subliminal entertainment. So music, of course, is obvious. It propels the story. It helps you change scenes. It also enhances performance emotions, very important. We scored that hindsight custom to that. And then in 3D elements, the methods, um, distinguish your sets and scenes. Like I said, 1906 living room. If we go back to that scene in another episode, just bank those elements. It saves you time. You don't have to find new sounds because they're all familiar and unique to that particular set. So that helps the mind remember where it is. Also, really important to keep your object-based movement in Atmos, which is where you take your sounds and you can move them around in a 3-dimensional space for the mix. Keep it natural. Don't go outside the realm of what you typically hear because it will take the listener outside of the story again. And you don't want them to ever leave the story. I mean, how many times you've been on a bicycle and you're listening to this and suddenly you almost fall off your bike because you jerk to the right because of a sound coming at you. And then lastly, shade, performers and sound design. Shading, meaning using various plugins and EQs, you can create an exterior and an interior sense. You can have a character literally step outside and change the shade of that voice. So the voice, your mind realizes, yeah, they just stepped outside. And then when you get it all together, what do you do for distribution? Unfortunately, right now, because we're really on the cutting edge, Dolby Atmos is not supported on most podcast platforms at this point. So what do you do? Do you release it in a down mix of the Atmos into stereo? I personally didn't want to do that, even though a stereo down mix of Atmos Immersive sounds better than standard stereo to my ear. It's not binaural. It's not 3D. So what we ended up doing was using what they call baked binaural files, which is basically sending out that the half of the Atmos process baked, so it's binaural, so you're going to have to listen to it on headphones or your phone, so it may not sound great in your car, but you make that clear to the audience. So that's the limitations we're facing right now, but hopefully in the coming months, all the platforms will eventually take Dolby Atmos, so the full experience will be available.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ted. I mean, that was a mini masterclass for everybody attending. But it's good. No, it's good because we're going to be getting into that even further on our next webinar, is when to partner with the sound mixer. Some of the stuff you got
Yep.
into the weeds for are really great, but for a lot of creative podcast producers, they don't know what to do. Like, that's a little bit past their skill set, which you hire someone like Mert to bring on to make all of those elements work. Mert, when working with the likes of Wondery and the other major podcast platforms, most of the time you're not on the production side as Ted was with Hindsight A to Z, and you may not have had the luxury of such a nice budget I think that Ted had on Hindsight. So when you're looking at it from a sound designer standpoint, and knowing that most of our attendees are creative producers, how do you want them to approach creative so they are producing their project in a way that can actually make it hopefully as efficient and set up to get into a true immersive 3D audio sound mix and design?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think like watching Ted, your presentation, the way that you guys captured audio on set together with like 12 mics is awesome. None of the shows that I worked on were that. Even the Wondery show Against the Odds it's not a multicast show. We like the narrator for the show also does all the character voices, so it's literally just one voice doing all of the parts, which creates a challenge of its own to, okay, how do we distinguish between the actual narration, the voiceover, and all the characters if it's the same person doing it? So I rely a lot on just like mixing skills to achieve that. Especially with Dolby Atmos, the narration typically lives a little higher, not necessarily like ground level. It's almost like the voice of God speaking on a higher plane. And then, as you mentioned, of like creating environments for, actors going inside or outside, like I use a lot of reverbs, post-production reverbs to create a set, as you're saying. Like if we're in this room, all of the character voices are in like this little bar that we're in. All of the Foley effects kind of follow that same reverb. And then if we go outside or if we go to like a cave, whatever, like reverb is my best friend to create those elements and really put the characters in those environments. In terms of, again, sound design elements, especially with Atmos, I like to layer all of my sound design because with stereo, let's say you're at a campfire telling a story and like just a sizzling, fire sound is enough. With Atmos, I really try to, okay, let's have some crickets in the back, some leaf rustling up top, some wind going through, and then the fire. So like all of those sound effects really create that immersive soundscape, and that's environment that we're in, and makes it believable for the listener, even if they're listening on just on headphones or if they have the Wondery app or the Audible places to like hear it full Atmos. But yeah, I think layering sound design elements to create the space is important for the work that I do. I think to your question of the actors also, again, getting the good performance out of your voice actors is important for a producer. I think because you can only do so much, they should really, like, even if they are in front of a music stand and like recording in a booth, conveying, the situation that they're in and have them really perform that thing as if they're there is going to make my job easier as a mixer to really, put them in that space. So the actor doesn't feel like they're out of the scene and they're reading a script in a room with a bunch of like sound design happening around them.
Yeah, thanks. And I think you may even have a couple screen shares to share. And for those who are doing it all, like Ted, but may not be as far along as Ted and his team was, but want to kind of see a template of how does this look? I'm stepping into this. Give me a little bit of a directional heading, to use an aviation analogy, of what I should be setting my flight deck, my template of Dolby Atmos to look like.
Yeah, let me start screen share over
And
here.
walk us through it, please, so we can see that.
Yeah, hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
Are you guys able to see this or no?
No.
Give me 1 second. Apparently, I thought I had allowed this. I have to go to my system settings. Give me 1 second.
You know what? I can say one thing quickly. What I didn't say was that I'm not a sound engineer, and it's really critical to have a great sound engineer. Andy Snavely of Bendy Sound did our mix, and he was a godsend because he took what we threw at him and made sense of it. You can't stress enough how important a good engineer is.
Yeah.
Are you able to see it now?
Yes.
Yeah. So walk us through. What is this?
So this is my mix and edit template, essentially. Typically from production, we'll just get the dialogue recorded, and the main thing is first editing, as Ted said, finding the beats and creating the narration and the dialogue. Are how fast we're going through with the script. Once that's all said and done, I'll start adding my music and background elements. So I'll give you a quick, explanation of what everything is. The first folder track I have here is the narration. And again, I have this in an object midway high up with some size. With anybody who's, tried Dolby Atmos mixing, they'll know what this is. If this is getting too technical, we can dive into this in another webinar series. But as I mentioned, this is not really sitting in the middle as your typical voiceover. Again, it has some height and some size to distinguish it from the rest of the elements. And then I'll cut in all of my character sounds into this, what I call ADR. And I'll place these accordingly where they need to be. If there's, if it's just two characters talking to each other, we typically have them a little off to the side. So, they're not in the center. They're talking to each other in an environment. As you mentioned, Dolby Atmos has, objects and bed channels. I don't want to get too detail specific, but I can have dialogues in just your surround channels. And if they really want to be specific in the atmosphere, then I'll assign them to objects and place them that way. Again, I have my Foley elements. This is where I cut my sound design. Even if I'm using like library sounds, I still label them as Foley and effects. I'm not necessarily really recording actual Foley for the podcast that I'm doing, but just as a session organization, I'll name these folders as, cars, gunshots, wave sounds. So I know where my sound design elements live, and I can go through my session quite, efficiently. I have my music elements. It's really important, I think, with audio, only elements like music is really the rhythm and the driving element in a audiobook. So cutting that and finding the tone, finding the right music is still as important as it is in stereo in Atmos. And then with, again, Atmos, you have the LFE channel, which comes from the film world, which is low frequency effect, so that the big explosions and the booms can really have a nice big low end. I use this in my mixes. It's represented in the binaural mix a little bit. Obviously, it's not the same thing as sitting in a room with a subwoofer, but if people do end up hearing these mixes in the future with sound bars and the distribution gets to a point, it's fun to use those things. And as I mentioned, reverbs, I have dedicated reverbs for my surround reverbs, my stereo reverbs for dialogue, effects, Foley, background music. So I really cultivate, create each scene and create different sets of environments for what the characters and what we're putting the listener in, essentially. So that's, again, really helpful. And then the rest is just like my master buses and, limiters on the way out. But this is basically, my mix template. It comes from my film mix template where I have not 2, but probably 8 or 10 FX groups and multiple dialogue things. So this is kind of like a simplified film mix template that I created for my podcast work. But yeah, if you're an engineer mixer, I recommend creating something like this that you can kind of start cutting sounds into and then start mixing immediately, so you're not jumping from different sessions to sessions, and you're not trying to reinvent the wheel every time you're starting a project. You have your base template that you can start working in, and it has all the right outputs going to the right places, and you can just start being creative from the get-go.
Thank you so much. What I love about this is, from a creative podcast producer standpoint, which is the space I typically play in, is understanding your world and how you work. Lets me collaborate with you more effectively. So to those who are attending who may be not sure, like, I don't want to do my own mix. Well, that's fine. But understanding what the mixer's doing, the language he's speaking, and the sandbox he or she is playing in just will make you that much better of a podcast creator and producer and storyteller. And so thank you for walking us through that. I think it's key that any podcast producing professional, on what spectrum of the production you are on, understands what you're building, because that essentially is the show. All the elements that come together, from the great script to the great voiceover acting to the great effects, is all going to come in here and become the show. And just even having a introduction to that is key to know it. So thanks, Mert, for walking us through there. Another thing I want to bring up is the intensity of 3D sound. Just because you can, should you? And playing in a 3D world, subtleties sometimes are just as important as exaggerations or the bigger sounds. Walk us through where you have both of you have maybe pulled back to let the brain do the filling, and more just kind of hint to the brain, but let it do the work. You don't necessarily need to blow out the ears to make it sound great. I'll start with you, Ted.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. One of the things, again, what makes it simpler in the design is that you're trying to maintain a natural sense. Makes sense. Would I hear this in the real world? That's your bottom line. It makes it pretty simple. So, to your point about oversensory, overloading the senses, we have our brain, again, going to the brain. Our brain has this ability to filter out things. So pretty much, you walk into a new room or outside, and there's just a cacophony of sound and noise, and your brain starts immediately filtering things out. What's not important, what's not a threat, and what's not a reward. I'm really just looking for those two things. So we mimic that in the mix. So as soon as we establish the scene, it starts to filter out, and we start to focus in on what's important, the conversation, the particular vehicle the person's in. And so otherwise we would just have sensory overload. So we're just sort of mimicking, again, the mind. On the other side of that spectrum, attention to detail is important. Again, using the analogy of painting a picture, sometimes I'll put a sound in that's like the equivalent of a single thread paintbrush. I don't expect it to be consciously heard, but the brain will perceive it, and it will add to the authenticity of the scene. And only when I went over to Dolby and they played the piece in there, like in a theater, because I went to see the first Dune movie that Mark Mangini mixed. And that, when I was thinking of how to do this, I was like, this is what I want. And so when I went over to Dolby, I actually heard that single thread paint sound that I did, because their sound quality is so good over there. So it pays off. So yeah. So again, I think the bottom line is just, how does the brain perceive? What do you hear when you go out? You hear a footstep when it's important, not necessarily when it's not important. So you kind of sort of, again, mimic the brain's perception.
Yeah, Mert, how would you approach the intensity of your mixes and when to pull back?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think with Dolby Atmos, you really have a lot of options to play sounds, and you can really go all out with it. But as Ted said, I think just, human brain can only focus on so many things at once also. So more sparse like I should say more focused sound design, where you're like pulling the attention to little bits and pieces, will actually feel more immersive rather than putting a whole bunch everywhere and letting the listener trying to figure out what's happening. Because again, they'll as you would like when you walk outside, you kind of like zone out things that don't matter. So it's actually the quiet scenes and like the more delicate scenes are feel more immersive to people, because they can actually, oh, I can hear the raindrops on the leaves and the little footsteps, and that's enough for people to be like, oh my God, this feels so immersive. I'm in this like woods and I can hear the character. Versus, I mean, if you have a fire going on in a forest or a big explosion scene, it's going to get big and loud and it's going to get exciting, but sustaining that excitement for a long time is difficult, because then the brain starts kind of zoning out. So then you have to, I think, create dynamics in your mix. If you have a scene that's a fighting scene, a chase scene, or whatever, and you always have cars or you always have a lot of things, I think it's pulling back on the sound design for a moment and letting the music do its thing, and maybe just cutting everything out and really focusing on the dialogue for a moment, for a line, and bring it back in. So create like playing with those dynamics. And we do this in like film and TV too all the time. Really helps the listener to break from the craziness of the scene while still following the story and then being back in it. And it just like, you can sustain excitement for a longer time. If you just had a constant, people will just, drift away. I think they will lose attention.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
like
I agree.
it's sort of like staying again. You want everything. Ultimately, you want all your work to be invisible, and so you want the brain to just buy it. That's the secret. The brain. I haven't thought about the fact I'm listening to a podcast. I was in that world, and so when you do pull it back a little bit, you can also then, because all the new technology in Dolby is so subtle and clear, you can start bringing in story through sounds approaching. So, your brain's going to pick up a threat's approaching before you consciously understand it. Then you're really playing to the brain and you're really playing your audience. So the nuance and the delicacy of this new technology is just spectacular.
Yeah. Yeah. For someone who's newer to 3D audio, immersive audio, but they've embraced podcasting. They believe in the format and the medium, and they want to tell stories in this audible space. But it's a kind of they're kind of deciding whether or not they're going to go into a 3D audio effort to add that dynamic to their shows. What would you say to them? What are you guys seeing in the marketplace with your clients, with the projects you're doing, with why are you so excited about this immersive 3D audio world? And what would you tell to those creators out there who are looking or debating, do we really need to do this? Do others aren't? Do we need to? Mark, I'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, to be honest with you, I've been educating creators in the music world and a little bit in the podcast audio world for a long time as to why they should do Atmos. Is the great thing about, I think, Atmos and immersive audio where it is right now is the consumer devices. There's more and more, and they're catching up. Like, it's in the 5.1 world, you still needed physical speakers in your house, and people didn't want to put wires through their apartments, so it didn't really work. But now with binaural audio on earbuds, you can hear everything. They're putting Dolby Atmos in cars. It's built into TVs. It's coming on your sound bars. So I think you're making a creative statement, whether this is an album that you're working on or an audiobook that you're creating or a film that you're doing. I think striving for the best quality and like the experience that you can create is a good thing to strive for. Even if your distribution channels are limited right now in terms of like the audio sense, the RSS feed doesn't accept the MP4, so it's an MP3 maybe baked in binaural, but that could change. Or like more apps like Audible and Wondery can come up where independent like distributors, like publishers, can distribute on these like apps.
But
Your
it's
master
coming. I
plan
mean,
once it's
you can buy a car with Dolby Atmos in it now.
exactly like those are
Yeah.
out there, so you can like listen to audiobooks in your car. A car is a great studio environment for the general public because it's a treated closed space with perfectly placed speakers. So I mean, it's going to happen, and if you're in the forefront, if you do this now, once your master file is ready, it's going to be the same master file for the next 50, 100 years or whatever. So you're not have to recreate a thing. Oh, we just did this for headphones, let's do it again. No, like if you have your master file, the consumer devices will catch up and people can listen to it in any way they want. So I think it doesn't take too much, even from the mixer point of view, to create these immersive scenes. Maybe it's a bit more sound design and mixing time. But in the end, you're not, I think it's cheaper than trying to go back and redo something in Atmos, and you should do it now, and you're going to reap the benefits down the line, I think.
I think
Good.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, aesthetic. I look at it all from an aesthetic perspective because I'm not an engineer, and I just, I think again to strip it down to the basics, we all like advances in entertainment. We like the bigger screens. We like the sound. What we're trying to, and what is that all doing? We're just mimicking reality, the storytelling experience to make it closer and closer to our real life experience. And all this is really a next step into replicating life as a story, which it makes it much more exciting. So I would say to people starting out, just go outside, take a walk, listen, you know. Most people hear, some people listen, some people, most people see, some people observe. If you learn to observe and listen, you'll see how things kind of work, and then it can become sort of straight ahead, to replicate that. And that's all the technology is enabling now. But to people starting out, I really would stress to learn the basics, learn economy, learn how to edit, learn, basic things that don't have anything to do with mixes, naturalistic dialogue, sounds that make sense, that aren't just thrown in. Start there. That you can do pretty much with any setup you have, and because the access to sound effects, etc. And then when you take it to the next step for the mixing and presentation, I totally agree with Mert. Master it in the best possible way you can. And what Atmos is allowing is to create a document that will translate to whatever medium, or device people are listening to. And you're right, why not make your masters as enduring as possible?
Yeah. Great. Wow, that's a great way to help wrap this up. Thank you, guys. We went a little long-winded. We usually offer more time for Q&A, but I think it was key to get into the weeds with both you two about how you approach the creative aspects and applications of immersive 3D audio. I don't know. I don't see any questions in the chat, so either we covered everything, or people are like, I don't want to listen to this anymore.
If anybody has, I'm happy to speak with anyone. You can reach me at ted@radiopictures.com, ted@radiopictures.com. Lastly, I would just say, if you want to hear what we're talking about, at least I can offer hindsight the day before. Find it on your regular platforms, and just make sure you're wearing headphones or AirPods or some personal listening device. Hindsight the day before, and you'll get it.
Mert, why don't you share your contact information?
I just did it.
Okay.
Exactly. People can reach me, mert@therecordhouse.com. There's hyphen between the words. It's in the chat. If you want to reach out to me with any questions, feel free to, email me there.
Okay. Well, I'm going to shamelessly plug. You can reach me at jwalker@velocity-studios.com, and an audio drama I'm very proud of. We didn't have as much money as hindsight, but it got there. Is the Metal Detective, which was a cyberpunk noir, a futuristic thriller, an Agatha Christie style murder mystery told in the course of an epic night in New York City in 2045. It was designed as a major motion picture with tons of visual effects, and we hit the top Dolby Atmos charts on IMDb as the only audio drama to hit it, among Mandalorian and a few other shows. So I'm pretty proud of what immersive audio, 3D audio, and
That's great.
what a true audio drama podcast can accomplish when you close your eyes and you let your mind go there.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that said, I want to thank everybody who tuned in. We have another one coming up on October 10th on when and how or why to partner with the Sound Mixer. And then and that's October 10th, and November 15th, I think it is, we're going to have a bunch of really experienced, exciting, and awesome sound mixers going into a masterclass of their techniques. So really kind of a deep, deep dive for those who want to get into the weeds of Dolby Atmos and 3D sound mixing. But with that said, I'll wrap this up. Thank you, everybody. Ted, Mert, you guys are the best. I will connect with you later. We're going to find a way to work together. You guys are brilliant. Thank you for making some time this morning and be with us.
And just to everybody, last word, have fun. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.